Hi, it's Katrina. Empire of Death. Some of the creepiest discoveries in history have been made inside the Paris catacombs. There are over 200 miles of spooky tunnels underneath the City of Love, most of them lined from the floor to the ceiling with skulls and bones of dead people. The history behind this Empire of Death is nothing short of ghoulish. It all started in the 17th century when the population began to spiral out of control and there were too many people dying. Graves and cemeteries were overflowing, and to fix the problem of what to do with the dead, Paris began sticking the deceased inside the tunnels built under their streets. The tunnels have been around since the 13th century, the remains of old quarries that helped turn Paris into a thriving city. By the time the tunnels stopped being used as burial grounds, there were 6 to 7 million dead Parisians entombed underground. What a lot of people don't know is that the dead buried in the catacombs weren't fresh when they were put down there. The city actually began emptying out its cemeteries in 1786 and putting the old bones beneath the city. It took about 12 years to fill the catacombs with some of the oldest human remains dating back 1,200 years, though the last person buried here was in 1890. Today, about a mile of the catacombs are open to visitors, but most of the tunnels are off limits. Would you visit these creepy tunnels, or have you already? Let us all know in the comments below. Ancient Hepatitis B. An ancient mummy from the 16th century is currently the oldest known case of hepatitis B in the world. 500 years ago, a young child died at the age of just 2. This child's remains were put inside of a crypt in Naples, Italy. Thanks to the dry conditions of the Basilica San Domenico Maggiore, where he was buried, the remains of the child slowly mummified over time. In the 1980s, researchers dug up the preserved body and diagnosed him with smallpox disease. But this was incorrect. A new genomic test revealed that the child didn't suffer from smallpox, but had instead been afflicted with hepatitis B. According to Smithsonian, the autopsy in the 1980s showed a rash on the mummy's body consistent with smallpox. But then, in 2016, the DNA was re-evaluated and not a single trace of the smallpox virus was found. Instead, they discovered hepatitis. Today, hepatitis B is still not something you want to catch. About 350 million people live with the virus, which infects the liver and spreads through the body via the blood. By analyzing the child mummy, scientists learned that almost nothing about the virus has changed in 500 years. It was already pretty much perfect when it infected the kid, though whether this is good news or not is yet to be seen. Probably not. The skull of Pliny the Elder. Pliny the Elder, or at least what's left of him, is sitting in a museum in Rome on display for all to see. The creepy display is a broken skull with most of its face missing, sitting among other bizarre relics such as pickled liver stones and malformed fetuses. But nobody really knows if this is indeed the skull of Pliny the Elder, the famed admiral and one of the most influential scholars of the time. Pliny worked his entire life to create a vast encyclopedia of general knowledge. We know that Pliny the Elder died during the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79. We just have no sure way of knowing if this skull really belongs to him. Biologists, geochemists, and even anthropologists have been conducting tests on the skull through the last few years to try and crack the case. The creepy artifact was discovered near Pompeii about 120 years ago. Pliny had been staying about 25 miles from the volcano at a villa when he was alerted to the huge cloud of smoke flowing into the sky. We know this because of the letters left behind by his nephew, Pliny the Younger. Seeing what was happening, Pliny the Elder wanted to get closer to the volcano to witness the eruption firsthand. He ran to the volcano while everyone else was running away from it. He then died in his pursuit of scientific knowledge, probably asphyxiated by volcanic fumes at the age of 56. In 1900, his alleged skull was found during excavations on a beach that recovered 73 skeletons total. One of the skeletons had a gold bracelet decorated with vipers, something Pliny the Elder was said to have worn, and so began the search to prove if it was actually him. Satanic abandoned home. A very creepy home was recently discovered, covered from wall to wall in terrifying satanic graffiti. The discovery was made by an urban explorer named Adam Corkill, who documented his journey into the abandoned Hell House and then posted what he found online. The country house had been left to rot a few decades before Adam explored it. It was deserted probably in the 1970s, as the interior of the house still looked straight out of a bad 70s sitcom. In fact, Adam said it felt like the occupant had only just left, despite the place being empty for a very long time. Everything was damp, the floor tiles were cracked, and there were personal effects strewn across just about every surface. Whoever had abandoned the house had done so seemingly at a moment's notice. And as if finding a creepy house abandoned wasn't bad enough already, Adam discovered strange graffiti on the walls talking about Satan. It's unclear whether the original homeowners were associated with some kind of satanic cult, but it's more likely some kids came by later and were just bored. Maybe cult members had been using the dilapidated structure for evil rituals. Adam did say that he felt ghosts in the house, though he was unable to say if it was haunted for sure. Mysterious Buenos Aires tunnels. In 1985, a resident of the historical Buenos Aires neighborhood San Telmo accidentally discovered what is still to this day one of the most important archaeological sites in the city. He found the portal to a secret underground labyrinth. It happened after he purchased an abandoned mansion with the intention of turning it into a restaurant. At the time of the purchase, the mansion was in dire shape. It needed to be heavily renovated, which the buyer, Jorge Eckstein, was willing to do. He began renovations and immediately noticed something bizarre about the foundation. He had a team of archaeologists come in to investigate, and they told him that the building was abandoned in the 1800s during a deadly wave of yellow fever. To get to the bottom of what was going on, Jorge dug beneath the foundation and was shocked to discover a creepy underground tunnel. Archaeologists had no idea there were tunnels underneath the city. They found roughly a mile of passageways, which they later learned were built by the locals back in 1780 to reroute a stream beneath the city that kept causing floods. There were no skeletons or ghosts in the tunnels, but they were still pretty spooky. They have since been restored and open for visitors. The creepy hum. The residents of the small industrial town of Kokomo in Indiana made a rather creepy discovery back in 1999. The people living here began reporting a low and consistent hum that was driving them completely insane and forcing some people to leave the town. A lifelong Kokomo resident told ABC News back in 2002 that everyone knew something was going wrong from the very start. The hum was giving people a headache, and that headache would turn into a constant migraine. Local residents also experienced a variety of other health problems after being exposed to the bizarre hum, ranging from strokes to nosebleeds. The constant stress was making everyone go crazy. But here's the deal. Only a small fraction of residents could hear the creepy hum. Of the 45,000 people living in Kokomo, only a few hundred could hear the noise. Still, enough people heard it that the city launched an investigation to see where this strange noise was coming from. As it turned out, the hum wasn't that creepy at all. It also had nothing to do with anything supernatural. The culprit was a set of large fans at the nearby Chrysler plant. They were giving off a weird frequency that only some people could pick up, and it was so constant it was driving them insane. Even after the plant fixed the fans, some people complained the hum was still going. Even today, some people who visit the city claim they can hear the noise. Shrunken head. There's been a shrunken head on display at a Georgia university for decades. Back in 1979, the shrunken head was used as a prop in the John Huston film Wise Blood. Well, what began as a prop has turned into a real piece of creepy history. A new study has authenticated the shrunken head as the actual head of a person. According to Insider, the grim artifact is now being sent back to Ecuador, back to the country of its origin. The head was acquired by Mercer University some years ago thanks to a former faculty member who picked up the artifact while serving in the military. The shrunken head is known as a tsansa, and it was likely taken from a defeated enemy around a century ago by an Amazonian warrior. When the former employee of the university was traveling through the Amazon, he met a tribe and traded them for the head, then brought it home with him. Craig D. Byron from the university said it's a relief to have the shrunken head away from the school, not only because everyone is creeped out by it, but also because it was just unnerving to have around. It was being kept inside of an underground vault, it was illegal to do anything with it because it was a human body part, and once the university was able to prove it was genuine, the staff were happy to ship it out of the country. The legend of shrunken heads goes back a long time, but early European explorers in the Americas did not know how the tribes used to make them. It turns out the head was sliced open, the skull was removed, the eyes and mouth were stitched shut, it was filled with hot rocks, and then boiled. The process took quite a long time, but eventually the head was shrunken down to about the size of a man's fist, maintaining certain facial features and becoming a symbol to scare the daylights out of your enemies. Man in a tree. A mysterious mummy was discovered frozen in a tree in Siberia. This isn't just a creepy discovery, it's a little unusual. According to the local Russian reports, the man was discovered 50 feet above the ground, petrified inside of the tree. He had been dead for just shy of a year. How and why he got up the tree in the first place is just as bizarre as the fact that nobody seemed to notice a dead guy in a tree. It's believed that he climbed the tree in the winter, perhaps to escape the cold or a bear, but died from hypothermia. He then slowly froze into a mummy, stuck up in the branches like a giant bird's nest. It was a father and son who finally noticed the body in the tree and worked to get his creepy corpse down. The last we heard, the local authorities were still trying to identify him. Creepy shipwreck. Off the coast of Bulgaria in the Black Sea, a team of researchers have discovered a creepy abandoned ship that has been lost for 2,400 years. This ship was once a Greek merchant vessel, but now looks like something from an underwater nightmare. Helen Farr, who was involved with the expedition, told the BBC it was like something from another world. They discovered the ship using their remotely operated vehicle. The thing rose up out of nowhere, suddenly appearing in the glare from the vehicle's headlights. The ship is so perfectly preserved, it seems to be stuck in time. The reason the ship has been preserved so well is that the water at the bottom of the Black Sea contains very little oxygen. There wasn't anything to help the ship decay or deteriorate. As for where it came from and how it sank, it had probably been moving between the ancient Greek colonies when it was hit by a storm, or there was an accident that caused the vessel to take on water. Unfortunately, the ship is so deep, about 1.2 miles below the surface, that it's beyond the reach of archaeologists. There is no way for them to breach its hold and find out what kind of mysterious cargo the ship was carrying. Human sacrifice. A new ceremonial complex has been discovered in Peru by using new remote sensing techniques. Satellite images helped Spanish researchers to identify around 55 enclosures high up in the mountains of Vilcabamba, about 90 miles from the city of Cusco. This place has never before been explored by archaeologists, but was likely part of the great Inca Empire. The Incas of Vilcabamba held out the longest against the Spanish invaders. They lived in the mountains at an altitude of over 9,800 feet, in a place they called the Cradle of Gold. It was so high in the mountains that the Spaniards had an extremely difficult time conquering it. Francisco de Toledo sent troops to destroy the mountain Incas in the year 1572. There was significant resistance, but the Inca were eventually bested and conquered. In modern times, the high altitude has kept archaeologists from studying the area for decades. Now, thanks to satellite images, they were able to identify ceremonial complexes and climb the mountains to investigate them. One of the creepier things they found is an Inca sanctuary in which children were prepared to be sacrificed. According to researcher Miguel Gutierrez, the victims were often sacrificed to prevent natural disasters or famine, and it was here, high up in the mountains, where many of them were prepared to meet their deaths. Archaeologists also discovered a platform made of rocks where they believe many of the sacrificed kids still remain buried. No bodies have been found just yet, as the archaeologists are still struggling to map the new sites and organize proper excavations.
The corpse collector. A Russian historian was caught after robbing the graves of 29 young girls and then taking their corpses home, where he turned the bodies into dolls. Anatoly Moskvin, 53, also expressed no remorse about his activities and refused to apologize to the parents of the deceased girls, claiming, "You left them in the cold. I took them home to keep them warm." The mummified remains of the girls were covered in masks, and he dressed them and applied makeup to them as well. One of the stranger aspects of this case, and there are obviously many, Moskvin actually shared his home with his parents. His parents told authorities they had absolutely no idea that he was collecting bodies and turning them into giant dolls. They just thought the large dolls were part of an unusual hobby. During the days of the Soviet Union, Moskvin worked as a translator for military intelligence. He went on after the collapse of the Soviet Union to write history books. He had a deep comprehension of biology and apparently of cemeteries. Over the years, he dug up many corpses, brought them home, dressed them in clothing, and kept them preserved in his own house. He even celebrated their birthdays with macabre parties. The corpse collector was captured in 2011 when he confessed to 44 counts of abusing graves. He was moved to a mental institution, and as recently as 2020, there were discussions of releasing him as his schizophrenia was reportedly cured. The judge in the case overturned the appeal, and he remains in custody. The Soapy Killer. The Italian serial killer Leonarda Cianciulli was born in 1894. She got married in the 1930s, opened up a little shop in the small town of Correggio, and started selling soap. Leonarda's shop may have been doing all right, but the rest of her life at the time was filled with strife. She served a short jail sentence for committing fraud. Her home was destroyed in an earthquake, and she was constantly battling with her parents about her marriage, which they didn't approve of. Not only that, but Leonarda was experiencing major fertility issues. She'd been pregnant 17 times, but of the 17 children, 3 died due to miscarriage, and 10 died during early childhood. She became incredibly superstitious about her children, and also became more deeply interested in fortune-telling, palm reading, and tarot, a childhood interest of hers. It was during a meeting with another fortune teller who predicted her remaining 4 children would also die that she was told that the only way to prevent her still living children from dying was to start sacrificing people. Leonarda was frightened, but she didn't start the human sacrifices right away. However, in 1939, her son told her he was joining the military. This pushed Leonarda into action, and she began luring women back to her soap shop and killing them in an effort to keep her surviving children safe. How did she kill these women, and what did she do with them? That's the true horror of it. She first tricked the women into going into her shop by promising to tell their fortune or offering to help them find whatever they were looking for, including telling one victim she could help them find a husband. She drugged her victims with spiked wine, then she killed each woman with an axe and boiled their body in caustic soda. She then used her victims' flesh and fat to make soap that she sold in her store. She gave these bars of soap to her neighbors, her friends, and anyone who would pay for them. She also used some of her victims' fat to make cakes, which she ate. But her killing spree ended after just the 3rd victim. A witness saw the victim going into her soap shop and then never coming out. When police went to investigate, she confessed everything and was arrested. Food for workers. In the United Arab Emirates, a Moroccan woman went seriously off the deep end. Back in 2018, she suffered a fit of insanity in which she killed her boyfriend of 7 years and then cooked him. According to a report from the BBC, her boyfriend had been planning on leaving her. He was actually planning to marry a different woman from Morocco, and this naturally upset the unnamed killer. Feeling like a thrown-away piece of trash, she murdered her boyfriend, cut him into pieces, ground up his flesh in a blender, and turned him into a traditional Moroccan dish with rice and vegetables. She then took the dish to some nearby Pakistani construction workers and watched them eat it. This part of the killing goes beyond unwarranted. The construction workers were made to eat a person without their knowledge and were likely completely horrified. Why she went to this extent of horror is beyond understanding. It was the murdered boyfriend's brother who ended up solving the case. When he went looking for his missing sibling, he found a single tooth sitting in a blender in the woman's house. He phoned the police, DNA tests confirmed the tooth belonged to the victim, and she broke down and confessed. Last we heard, she was sent to a mental hospital. Ed Gein's furniture of horror. When it comes to killers who made a career out of crafting things from the remains of their victims, Ed Gein holds the title of most creative. When the authorities raided Ed's house back in the 1950s, they found so much horror that it's hard to even describe. Ed had a fascination with decapitation, necrophilia, and arts and crafts. He started out as a fairly ordinary resident of Plainfield, Wisconsin, but when his mother died, he really went off the rails. He had been oddly obsessed with his mother and didn't seem able to process the fact that she was gone. In the mid-1950s, when Ed was alone and confused, residents of Plainfield began going missing. By 1957, the police had linked Ed to both Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden, both of whom had vanished. When the police went into Ed's house, they found suits, lampshades, and chairs made from human skin, masks made from people's faces, a belt crafted of human nipples, and several human organs stuffed into jars. Not only had Ed been killing multiple local women, he had also been digging up graves at the nearby cemetery, using the bodies of the recently deceased in his arts and crafts experiments. The man who is credited as being the inspiration for the killer Buffalo Bill in the movie Silence of the Lambs was later found guilty of murder and criminally insane. He died in captivity in 1984. Old Lady Killer. Ed Gein may have been one of the most notorious serial murderers, but Juana Barraza Samperio is a criminal mastermind. She is currently spending the rest of her days locked up in the Santa Marta de Acatitla prison in Mexico. The reason for her incarceration? She killed at least 48 people. She's known as the Little Old Lady Killer. When still living on the outside, she spent her days selling popcorn and occasionally fighting in wrestling matches. The rest of her time, she was hunting and killing elderly women. According to the Mexican authorities, Juana killed nearly 50 people in Mexico City between the 1990s and January 25, 2006. She only got caught when a neighbor witnessed her leaving the scene of a crime. Although the cops couldn't get evidence for every murder, they did manage to pin her in 17 of them. These 17 murders alone earned her 759 years in jail. During her trial, it came out that Juana was a psychopath incapable of feeling remorse. She actually thought she was helping society by getting rid of elderly women, likely because of the trauma she experienced in her own childhood. When Juana was just a young girl, her mother would trade her to dangerous men for things like beer and cash. When she grew up, she took that hate of her mother and transformed it into something evil, lashing out at older women, perhaps because they reminded her of her mother. And now for a serial killer Santa. But first, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We have more true crime coming soon. Serial killing Santa. Bruce MacArthur was seen on the outside as a happy man. Those that knew him described him as outgoing, friendly, and even jovial. He had white hair, a white beard, and played the perfect Santa Claus at the Agincourt Mall in Toronto as recently as 2016. He was a 66-year-old landscaper who posed as Santa during the holidays, and it seemed that he loved children. What no one knew was that Bruce had a bizarre attraction to the dead. Not only did he have an obsession with dead bodies, but he was also a serial killer. As a landscaper, Bruce used his cover to bury the bodies of his victims in his customers' gardens. While his clients thought he was simply creating beautiful landscapes, he was actually turning them into secret graveyards. Between 2010 and 2017, Bruce MacArthur murdered 8 men that we know of. His targets were the homeless, the destitute, and immigrants in the predominantly gay neighborhood of Church and Wellesley. Bruce's method of killing is what will really give you chills. Strangulation was his preferred method. He would wrap a rope around his victim's throat, then use a metal bar to tighten the ligature. Once his victim had stopped breathing, Bruce would then do a photo shoot. He would dress up his victims in things like fur coats, sometimes positioning them as if still alive, with one victim even photographed with a cigar hanging out of his mouth. When Bruce was finally caught by the police, authorities in Toronto had to check out 75 properties in search of remains. Bruce had concealed many victims in the planters and gardens he had worked on as a landscaper. How do you think you'd react if the police told you they needed to inspect your yard for human remains? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. The Torso Murders. From 1935 to 1938, between 12 and 13 bodies were found dumped in Cleveland's Kingsbury Run. The area is a creek bed that runs through the city down to the Cuyahoga River. The victims included at least 7 men and 5 women, most of whom were unhoused or sex workers. These unfortunate people were living far below the poverty line in the days when Cleveland was still suffering from the impacts of the Great Depression. Most of the individuals weren't reported missing for months after their disappearances, sometimes not even until their bodies were found. What makes these murders especially disturbing was the fact that every single body was found without a head or limbs. The only parts of the remains that turned up were the torsos of the victims. After over 80 years, this is still the most gruesome crime spree in the history of Cleveland. The killer is known today as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, and believe it or not, he or she has never been identified by the police. The killings only stopped when the killer presumably lost interest, moved, or died. Even years after the torsos stopped turning up, authorities still were unable to locate all the heads. To this day, no one knows what the Mad Butcher did with the heads and the limbs of their victims. The Bone Collector. In Mexico, authorities recently discovered approximately 3,787 bone fragments that they say belong to at least 17 different murder victims. The killer in this story was a bone collector. He had a fascination with killing and dismembering. The Mexican authorities have not been able to release his identity, but they do say that by the time they caught up to him, he was 72 years old. The cops actually arrested this serial murderer in connection with the killing of a 34-year-old woman, whom he reportedly cut up with a hacksaw. It was when they began looking at his home that they discovered the true scope of his crimes. During careful excavations, the police found the bones and bone fragments, as well as 91 photographs, 8 cell phones, a bucket full of women's jewelry, and actual videotape of the man murdering his victims. He had been dismembering his victims, cutting them up so small that he had pieces of them hidden all throughout his house. The police were shocked and horrified when they realized the extent of the crime scene. As of right now, the police are still trying to extract DNA from the bone fragments to identify the victims, many of which are probably missing people. In the meantime, the identity of this prolific serial murderer has still not been released. Human burgers. Joe Metheny, much like Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy, was a truly gruesome killer. But for some strange reason, despite the horror of his crimes, he is not as well known. If you're one of those people who haven't heard of him, get ready to be shocked. Joe was arrested in Baltimore back in December of 1996. At the time, police knew he was responsible for at least 3 murders. But after he was convicted of these murders, he finally spilled the beans that he killed at least 10 people. He also admitted that he was a cannibal, and that he served his victims to unsuspecting patrons of his burger stand. He would take the meat from people he killed and mix it with pork or beef, or simply use it as it was. And shockingly enough, Joe told the authorities that not a single person could seem to taste the difference between regular burgers and those made with his victims. Joe was given several life sentences to be served continuously and without the possibility of parole. Since his arrest, however, he has repeatedly begged for the death sentence. In an interview, Joe told the press that the only thing he regrets about his killing spree is that he was caught before he had the opportunity to kill the 2 people he really wanted, his ex-girlfriend and the guy she replaced him with. Boyfriend stew. Catherine Knight killed her boyfriend and then turned him into a stew. For this bizarre crime, she became the first Australian woman to receive a life sentence without parole. The terrible murder came after a lifetime of toxic relationships. Catherine's life and relationships were plagued with abuse, violence, and frightening fits of temper. In 1995, she moved in with John Price, the man who she would eventually murder. According to friends and family, she had wanted to marry him, but John declined. When he refused to get married, Catherine turned violent. In 2000, the pair argued, and Catherine tried to stab him in the chest. Price had to get a restraining order against her, but they later reconciled. Price, however, would not let Knight move back into the home in order to protect his 2 older children. On February 29, 2000, she let herself into John's house, seduced him in the middle of the night, and once he was asleep, she stabbed him 37 times. Catherine then went downstairs, dragging his body behind her. She hung him from a meat hook in the living room, one of the tools of her trade as a butcher, removed his head, then cooked up a meal using his body, along with potato and pumpkin, some squash, and a bit of gravy that she intended to later serve to John's children. After Catherine finished cooking her lover, She took John's headless body and lay down with it in bed. She swallowed a whole bunch of pills and fell asleep. When the police arrived the next morning at the behest of John's co-workers, who were worried because he didn't show up to work, they found Catherine covered in blood, John's body, and the remnants of her macabre meal. She claimed to have no memory of what she had done, but was charged and convicted of murder nonetheless.
Asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, an asteroid 6 miles wide smashed into the Earth in what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The impact created a 93-mile-wide depression known today as the Chicxulub crater. This caused an entire sequence of events that would lead to the end of the dinosaurs. But the scary thing is that it looks like this could happen again. All the creatures in the immediate vicinity were instantly wiped out, while dinosaurs in other parts of the world succumbed to the collision's secondary effects. Following the blast, there was a big heat wave, and massive tidal waves swept onto the Americas, devastating fires erupted, and soot blanketed the planet, blocking out the sun and making all the plants die. The ensuing food shortage killed plant-eating dinosaurs en masse, and the carnivores that relied on them as food died next. A new study claims to finally reveal the origins of the massive rock that eliminated the dinosaurs in one fell swoop, ending their 180 million year presence in the world. Scientists examined core samples taken from the Chicxulub crater and identified chemicals that are only found in 3% of all meteorites that fall to Earth. These primitive asteroids reflect very little light, making them noticeably darker than others. Created very early on in our solar system's history, they are found between Mars and Jupiter on the outer limits of our main asteroid belt. Computer models show that around every 250 million years, a large asteroid was yanked out of the belt by thermal forces and the gravitational pull of nearby planets. The scientific community praised this study as the best argument yet for where the dinosaur-destroying asteroid came from, and to keep an eye out just in case it happens again. It looks like large debris like this can hit Earth once every 250 million years, about 10 times more often than scientists previously thought. Giant flying dragon. A giant flying dragon reptile once terrorized the skies over what is now Australia. Researchers have discovered a giant fossil of a rare specimen that lived over 105 million years ago. A team of scientists at the University of Queensland analyzed a jaw fossil that was found in northeastern Queensland over a decade ago and identified the creature as Australia's largest flying reptile. The new species had an estimated 23-foot wingspan. That's roughly the size of a school bus, and its head alone measured 3 feet long. It used its 40 razor-sharp teeth for grabbing up fish and small dinosaurs from the prehistoric Eromanga Sea, a shallow inland water body that once covered parts of Australia. The Guardian reports it has been given the scientific name Thapungaka shawi, a combination of the Wanamara Nation words for spear and mouth, and the surname of the person who discovered the fossil. And it wasn't built to eat broccoli. This is only the third pterosaur species ever found on the continent. Evidence of these flying giants is rare throughout the entire world because they had extremely thin, hollow and fragile bones that rarely became fossilized. Pterosaurs were cousins of the dinosaurs that went extinct at the same time and have no living relatives, which is probably a good thing unless you really wish we had giant reptiles in the sky that could swoop down and grab you. A new feathered species. Between 72 and 66 million years ago during the late Cretaceous period, a feathered theropod dinosaur roamed the landscape of southeastern Brazil, in what is now the state of Minas Gerais. Dubbed Ipupiara lopi, the recently described species was a piscivore, meaning it fed solely on fish. As a member of the Dromaeosauridae family, it had relatives all over the world, but it was the first member of its kind to be found in the region, and only the second ever discovered in Brazil. Scientists identified Y. lopi based on partial jawbones and teeth. The findings are proving helpful for learning more about the evolution of dromaeosaurids who lived on the Gondwanan supercontinent. Commonly called raptors, these dinosaurs share a common ancestor with modern birds. They range from the size of a wolf to as much as 30 feet long. Based on their prominent slashing talons, strong jaws, sharp teeth, and agile frames, experts believe that these so-called raptor dinosaurs were fierce, fast-moving predators. Arctic-dwelling dinosaurs. Toward the tail end of the dinosaur's existence, around 70 million years ago, the Earth's climate was much warmer than it is now, but places like Alaska still saw snowy winters and below freezing temperatures. And since dinosaurs are known to be cold-blooded creatures, scientists long dismissed the possibility that they lived in these frigid environments year-round. That all changed with the discoveries of fossilized evidence from 7 dinosaur species as far north as 250 miles above the Arctic Circle. It's the farthest north that dinosaur eggs have ever been found, and their presence suggests that these creatures overwintered in the Arctic. This means that some dinosaurs must have been partially warm-blooded. In other words, at the very least, they were capable of using internal functions to warm their bodies and survive the extreme cold and months-long darkness that came with a polar winter. News like this reminds us of how little even the experts know about dinosaurs still, and that there may be equally surprising discoveries yet to come. New duck-billed dinosaur. A large family of duck-billed dinosaurs known as hadrosaurs roamed the Earth during the late Cretaceous period between 86 and 66 million years ago. These plant eaters were equipped with rows of teeth designed for grinding plants, which replaced each other as the dinosaurs' chompers wore down. Adults normally walked on 4 legs, but were capable of walking or running on 2 legs when they needed to. Earlier this year, scientists identified a new hadrosaur genus and species based on a fossil that was found on a small Japanese island in 2004. Nicknamed the Yamatosaurus, it's one of only 2 late Cretaceous dinosaurs ever found in Japan. The other, Kumyosaurus, was identified 2 years ago after being discovered on the island of Hokkaido. Unlike other hadrosaurs, the Yamatosaurus had tough teeth that did not fall out or grow back easily. This suggests that it may have had a different diet than its relatives on the mainland. The creature's skeletal structure is also different from other hadrosaurs, falling somewhere between that of a 4-legged and 2-legged walker. From an evolutionary standpoint, this indicates that hadrosaurs may have originated in Asia. The discovery is helping scientists piece together the migration patterns of these dinosaurs. Previously, experts believed that hadrosaurs migrated from North America to Asia via the Bering Land Bridge, but now it looks like it was the opposite. Fossilized nesting dinosaur. Earlier this year, scientists made the first ever discovery of a fossilized dinosaur on a nest of eggs containing fossilized embryos. The specimens were found embedded in 70-million-year-old rock in Gansu City, China. They were a type of feathered bird-like dinosaur known as an Oviraptorosaurus, which lived during the Cretaceous period. When the mother dinosaur died, she was sitting on a clutch of 24 eggs, which contained at least 3 partially developed embryos, some which had visible limbs, 4 arms, and partial tails. The babies were nearly ready to hatch, showing that the mom was very attentive to her nest. This marked the first discovery of non-avian dinosaur eggs with embryos still inside. The amount of time the expecting parent spent tending to the eggs shows that some dinosaurs were very nurturing toward their young. In this particular instance, the dedicated mother died while incubating her nest. Scientists also found gastroliths, or stomach stones, inside the adult's abdomen. Dinosaurs purposely ate these pebbles to help them digest their food. It's the first time gastroliths have been detected inside of an oviraptorid, offering new insight into these feathered creatures' diets. Australia's largest dinosaur. Imagine looking out your window and seeing a 2-story tall reptile as long as a basketball court. This was the size of a gargantuan dinosaur that dominated the landscape of Queensland, Australia from 96 million to 92 million years ago. Measuring 80 to 100 feet long and 16 to 21 feet tall at the hip, Australotitan cooperensis was the largest dinosaur ever known to live in Australia and one of the biggest in the world. Tipping the scale somewhere between 25 and 81 tons, it would have dwarfed the T-Rex, which was less than half its length and 1/3 of its weight at the most. Australotitan was from a group of dinosaurs called sauropods. These plant-eating giants had long necks and tails and walked on all 4s. Scientists excavated the creature's bones back in 2007, but only recently identified Australotitan as a new species. Speaking with ABC Australia earlier this year, paleontologist Scott Hucknall explained that the process of removing, preparing, and studying the fossils was painstaking. In order to determine if the bones were, in fact, from a new species, The team had to compare the specimen against all other known dinosaur species in the world. Australotitan was from a lineage of massive dinosaurs called titanosaurs, which have been found on nearly all continents. Most of the largest examples come from South America's Patagonia region. The presence of super-large titanosaurs in Australia and South America suggests that they lived on an interconnected landmass that also included Antarctica, according to paleontologist Diego Pol, who told National Public Radio that this means there could be undiscovered titanosaur fossils in Antarctica. Argentine apex predator. Roughly 85 million years ago, during the so-called twilight period of the dinosaurs leading up to their extinction, several carnivorous giants called abelisaurids wreaked havoc on the Argentine Patagonia region. This terrifying group of predators includes a new genus and species described earlier this year, Leucalcan aleocranianus. It measured 16.4 feet long and was armed with huge claws and a 20-inch skull filled with serrated teeth. While the species was far from record-breaking in size, it was formidable in its own right. At a time when modern-day South America was part of the Gondwana supercontinent, this gargantuan beast lived in alarmingly close proximity to Via venator exoni, another abelisaurid that was found just 2,300 feet away in 2018. They probably competed for food and occasionally fought and killed one another, according to paleontologist Dr. Federico Gianecchini, who told Reuters that it was unusual but not unbelievable to find the pair so near to each other. A study revealed that A. aleocranianus had better hearing and a superior sense of smell compared to other abelisaurids, giving it an advantage over dinosaurs with an equally strong bite and ability to shred prey. These and other discoveries show that abelisaurids were surprisingly diverse and abundant in Patagonia and elsewhere throughout the world as the dinosaurs' final days on Earth approached. Long-necked pterosaur. Roughly 100 million years ago, modern-day Morocco was filled with massive dragon-like pterosaurs with necks as long as those of giraffes. These winged beasts, called Asdarchid pterosaurs, had large jaws and preyed on fish, small mammals, and baby dinosaurs. With wingspans of up to 26 feet and necks measuring up to 5 feet long, these creatures were some of the largest flying animals that ever lived. Due to their size and proportions, scientists have long questioned how they managed to get airborne without snapping their necks. A closer look at the fossilized vertebrae of an Asdarchid pterosaur showed that its bones were filled with dozens of millimeter-thick spikes. The protrusions were crisscrossed like the spokes of a bicycle wheel, forming a helix around the bone. Experts had never seen anything like it. Using mathematical methods, the team determined that these unusual structures enabled the pterosaurs to carry nearly twice as much weight as they would have been able to without the spikes. These colossal creatures would have been able to lift prey as heavy as 20 to 24 pounds. The unique bone structure also protected the Asdarchid pterosaurs from strong winds they encountered in flight and against male rivals during fights. Unfortunately, the scientists did not test the bones of pterosaurs from outside the region where the Asdarchid specimens lived, leaving some critics of the study a little unimpressed. Are you impressed? Let me know in the comments below. A plant-eating giant. Around 130 million years ago, a large herbivorous dinosaur with multiple claws, big nostrils, and a huge tail lived in modern-day Spain's Castellón province. It was somewhere between 20 and 26 feet long and weighed as much as 3,600 kilograms. The recently identified species belonged to a new genus and was closely related to dinosaurs found in what are now China and Niger. It was a duck-billed dinosaur or hadrosaur, and its presence in eastern Spain supports the scientific belief that the Iberian Peninsula once contained a diverse array of similar creatures from the same family. A 2009 study theorized that hadrosaurs migrated to the area from Asia and North America because the specimens found throughout Europe appear more evolved than their seemingly primitive relatives elsewhere. Scientists believe that modern-day Spain was home to the last surviving hadrosaurs in Europe, leading up to the extinction event that killed the dinosaurs. New species in Asia. Back in 1997, scientists unearthed a single fossilized dinosaur vertebra in Navoy Vilayat, Uzbekistan. It belonged to a large plant-eating sauropod that lived around 92 million years ago during the Cretaceous. The creature was finally identified as a new species, Zara titanis kingi, earlier this year. It belongs to a large family of herbivorous dinosaurs called Rebbachisauridae and is the first dinosaur of this type to be found in Asia. All the other recorded Rebbachisauride fossils were found in South America, Africa, and Europe. The discovery stretches the family's known range considerably far east of its previous boundaries. This specimen also represents one of the youngest Rebbachisaurids in the fossil record, according to the study's co-authors Dr. Alexander and Dr. Hans Dieter. They believe that these dinosaurs migrated to Asia from Europe via a land bridge across the Turgai Strait that no longer exists, but they're not sure when this happened. Only a few other non-avian dinosaurs have been found in the Besetski Formation where the species was discovered, including another sauropod group and an unidentified titanosaur, the Alien Pharaoh. Akhenaten was the first pharaoh to change the religion of the whole kingdom of Egypt, forcing his people to abandon their old gods and worship just one god, Aten. He ruled for about 17 years, and during that time he erased the monuments of Amun and Mut and replaced them with the sun disk god. Previously known as Amenhotep IV, he changed his name and built a whole new capital called Amarna out in the desert. During this time, it's believed he married Queen Nefertiti, and she became his queen consort, ruling alongside him. Besides these drastic religious changes, Akhenaten was known for his very strange, almost alien appearance. He was portrayed as having large almond eyes, a very small protruding abdomen, weirdly thin limbs, and a skull much larger than any normal human. Egyptologists have been mystified about this strange representation of the pharaoh, but it seems that he may have suffered from a severe physical deformity that he was trying to hide. Other artwork showing him does not make him look like an alien. Assistant professor of comparative genomics at Cairo University, Stuart Fleischman, mapped the genome of 9 Egyptian pharaohs. 8 of the genomes were normal, but the DNA from Akhenaten was unusual. His DNA demonstrated unusual growth in his cerebral cortex, which meant he had a mutation which caused his brain to grow far larger than normal. Based on his looks, his DNA, and his weird behavior as a pharaoh, some believe he was actually an alien-human hybrid. Though what his mission was on Earth, nobody can say. It didn't go well for him in the end. He was quite hated, and when his own son, King Tut, took the throne, he erased much of what his father had done and returned Egypt to the old gods. The Grand Canyon Forbidden Zone. The Grand Canyon has also been home to many controversies and wild speculations in recent years. Over 100 years ago, in 1909, a local Phoenix newspaper in Arizona reported that archaeologists had discovered an Egyptian cave in the Grand Canyon. This is obviously insane, because as far as we know, no Egyptians ever made it to North America. If true, the discovery of an Egyptian party of explorers in the Americas would flip the world of history on its head. Here's what happened. An explorer was floating down the Colorado River when he saw a strange cave carved into the side of one of the cliffs. He alerted the Smithsonian, who then sent their very own scientists to investigate. The local press got hold of the story, and they sent their own men to investigate. The reporters were shocked when it turned out the cave was filled with Egyptian artifacts. At the time, it was suggested that the Smithsonian hauled about 40 full truckloads of artifacts out of the cave and then erased any proof the Egyptians were ever there. Naturally, the Smithsonian denies all of these claims. Why would they want to erase evidence? They say there never was a cave. No Egyptian people ever made it to North America thousands of years ago, and they never took away any mysterious artifacts. All these years later, there is no way to really know, but rumors like this always persist. Perhaps Egypt and the Nile and Arizona and the Colorado River are linked by a historical chain and mysterious tablets. But perhaps during this time, early propaganda in the United States wanted to promote manifest destiny and didn't really want to promote advanced indigenous people, so any artifacts and objects left over were hidden or destroyed to make it seem like the land was empty and up for grabs. Apart from all this, Ancient Origins reports there is truth to the fact that many geological formations of the Grand Canyon were named after Hindu and Egyptian gods and temples, but no one really knows who named these places. There is an alleged forbidden zone in Grand Canyon National Park where hikers can't enter and researchers can't explore. It is a place full of ancient tunnels carved out by the Hopi people, and no one can enter any of the caves or old salt mines, and no permits will ever be issued. Some speculate this forbidden zone could be hiding the secrets that scientists don't want us to know about a rogue group of Egyptians living in the Grand Canyon. What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments below. The Code of Uramu. The Code of Uramu is considered the oldest surviving code of law. The text was written on several clay tablets by ancient Sumerians. The code was transcribed sometime in the 3rd century BC, discovered in the 1900s by archaeologists excavating the ancient city of Nippur in modern Iraq. They found the law book split into 2 pieces, one detailing the origins of the code and the other proclaiming the 5 main laws. In 1952, these laws were translated by Samuel Kramer, world-renowned expert on ancient Mesopotamian cultures. By 1965, more fragments of the code were found and translated. By the time all was said and done, archaeologists had revealed 40 laws put down by the Sumerians to be obeyed by all. What's quite interesting is how similar the laws of Sumer thousands of years ago are to our own laws today. The capital offenses were things like murder and robbery, with punishment almost always being death. For less serious offenses, punishment usually included imprisonment or hefty fines. These were things like kidnapping, knocking out another man's tooth, and even practicing sorcery. They also had laws about accusing somebody who wasn't guilty. If you were to accuse a man of committing a crime, and that crime turned out not to be real, you instead would be the one who was punished. While there are earlier codes of law in history, it was this Code of Uramu that survived on stone tablets. This code may have been written by King Uramu or his son, and this period in Sumerian history in the 3rd millennium BC is believed to have been generally peaceful and prosperous. Neolithic Egypt. In the year 3100 BC, the great dynasty of what we think of as ancient Egypt began. This was the beginning of the pharaohs and the pyramids. But what happened before that? Who were the mysterious people who gave rise to the powerful kingdoms of ancient Egypt? According to the experts, Neolithic activity was going on in Egypt somewhere around 6,000 years before the first pharaoh. It was the lifestyle and technological advancements made by these unnamed humans that allowed Egypt to blossom into the advanced civilization we think of today. But who were these people, and how did any of this happen? Or maybe an even more important question, why does it seem mainstream archaeologists have ignored the Egyptian ancestors? The answer is they haven't. They actually are trying, but it is extremely difficult. There are changes in human migration patterns and advances in technology and changes in the land and environment that will just make you bored. However, recent analysis of 6 ancient burial sites may shed some light that will grab your attention. One of the problems with trying to research prehistoric Egypt is that the sites created by the even earlier people are either completely gone or hidden under the sand. These 6 newest sites were excavated in the Western Desert, and researchers uncovered proof that whoever lived here before the Egyptians did things like domesticate cattle and goats, buried their dead in complicated tombs, and they built megalithic structures. We don't have an exact identity for them yet, but judging by the handful of skeletons recently uncovered and a small assortment of artifacts, we can safely say there was an entire civilization living in Egypt before the pharaohs ever took over. We just don't know who they were, where they learned new technologies, or where they even came from. First, want to give a big shout out to Letitia Spoon and Kyle Brown. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the Origins Explained family. We have lots of videos coming up. Chamber of Secrets. In 2010, a group of archaeologists working in Kolkata, India, formerly Calcutta, stumbled upon a mysterious chamber of secrets in the National Library. This library is over 250 years old, built back in the 1760s as a palace, and then converted into a library in 1891. After the mysterious chamber was discovered, there was a lot of speculation as to its purpose. Some claimed it was installed by British lords and used for torture. Others said it was a secret treasure vault where the British masters kept all the priceless artifacts that they stole from the local people. Unfortunately for all of us, the Chamber of Secrets turned out to be pretty boring. After all the speculation, archaeologists came out and admitted that the chamber was actually just a pocket in the structure, probably used by the architects to strengthen the foundation of the building. It was basically empty, so if it did ever hold anything interesting, it was long gone. Either that, or a more fun theory promoted by conspiracy theorists is that the archaeologists discovered something so heinous about the secret chamber's history that they lied to the world. After all, the National Library is a pretty mysterious building on its own, rumored to be haunted with spirits breathing down your neck and making you feel cold while you are trying to read. There are other rumors that the library has other rooms that cannot be opened, chairs that move on their own, and tortured spirits dropping books. Forbidden worship. For hundreds of years, the most important place of worship in Israel was the Holy Temple, a pair of amazing structures atop the Temple Mount in the heart of Jerusalem. It is written in the Bible that the Holy Temple is where God will dwell alongside his people. However, the Holy Temple is no more. It was destroyed by the Babylonian conquest in 587 BC, rebuilt, then destroyed for good by the Romans in 72 AD. According to Tom Meyer from the Shasta Bible College, there was actually a secondary, secret temple in Israel during the days of the Holy Temple. It was hidden in the Negev desert, and if the Bible is to be believed, this was a forbidden place where nobody was supposed to be worshiping anything. In the Old Testament, it's written that God designated only one temple for worship, the Holy Temple. But this secretive temple in the desert, first uncovered by archaeologists in the 1960s, was fully operational for at least 300 years, in spite of the one temple rule. In other words, people were disobeying God's law. At least they were, until King Josiah destroyed the Forbidden Temple for good in the 7th century BC, leaving behind nothing but a ruin. Ancient Olympic champion. Kyniska of Sparta was one of the most legendary women of ancient times, and yet she's conveniently been left out of history books. Kyniska was a Spartan princess, the daughter of King Archidamus II and the sister of King Agesilaus, and the first woman ever to participate in the Olympic Games. According to historical records, Kyniska was probably between the age of 40 and 50 when she participated in the Olympics in the year 396 BC. This was no ordinary princess. As a royal Spartan, she had her very own stable where she could breed, raise, and train horses. And since Spartan society actually encouraged both men and women to train in areas of physical strength, it wasn't at all a big shock when Kyniska entered the Olympics. This is in stark contrast to neighboring Greece, where girls were essentially shut away from the public and kept more isolated. Popular culture may show the Spartans as fierce male warriors, but there were plenty of tough women too, as it was an entire warrior society. Kyniska was so tough that she competed in what's called a tethrapon, a type of ancient triathlon involving chariot racing. She won the games in both 396 and 392 BC. This is in direct conflict with what you'll find online, with almost every major news source claiming the first Olympic Games to allow female athletes was in 1900 in Paris. Wrong, it was Sparta over 2,000 years ago, and she won, twice. The Nampa Image. The Nampa Image was allegedly discovered in 1889 during the construction of a water well. This was in the small town of Nampa, Idaho. The workers uncovered a small figurine no more than 1.5 inches long inside the sand pump at an incredible depth of 300 feet below the surface. The figurine was made of baked clay and had clearly been fashioned by intelligent hands to look like a human. The issue with the discovery was that it was impossible. The rock where it was found was dated back to 2 million years ago, way before humans were even around, let alone in North America. How would a figurine be lost and then buried under 300 feet of earth 2 million years ago? There's no way. The discovery was quickly dismissed as a hoax. Scientists didn't look into it thoroughly, and the figurine was simply called a fake. Over time, people lost interest and the object was forgotten. But ancient astronaut theorists and others remember this object and use it as an example of just one of many out-of-place artifacts left behind by an ancient civilization that lived in North America way before human beings had even moved out of Africa. The more likely story is that ancient people did make the figurine, but then it got lost, and it could have just been swept away by water and the elements until it turned up again. It's apparently still on display at the Idaho State Historical Society in Boise. The Necronomicon. The Necronomicon, also known as the Book of the Dead, is a grimoire spoken of by the famous author H.P. Lovecraft. It also appears in the Evil Dead movie franchise. But it was first mentioned in 1924 in Lovecraft's short story The Hound. Lovecraft claims the book was written by a real person, someone named the Mad Arab, Abdul al-Azred. The Necronomicon allegedly contains the history of the Old Ones, godlike beings such as Cthulhu. It also tells the reader exactly how to summon them to the physical plane. But just how much truth is there to this mysterious book? Probably just like the lost city of Atlantis, not much. Lovecraft claimed he came up with the name Necronomicon with the help of a dream. But modern historians believe Lovecraft was influenced by a collection of short stories written by Robert W. Chambers titled The King in Yellow. When asked about the authenticity of the Necronomicon, Lovecraft himself admitted there never was any person named Abdul al-Azred, aka the Mad Arab. He also said that he invented everything about the book himself. Still, there are some hardcore believers that say H.P. Lovecraft knew more than he admitted. Lovecraft wrote that there are still 5 original copies of the Necronomicon worldwide, one at the British Museum, another at the University of Buenos Aires, Harvard University, one in France, and the final copy in the fictional town of Arkham, Massachusetts. If the Necronomicon is truly real, these are the places to start looking. Thanks for watching! Which of these examples of forbidden history shocked you the most? What would you like to learn more about? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you soon! Bye!